This passage I just read to you, I was discussing it with our youth at the youth ministry on Tuesday night. And it's part of our ongoing discussion over there about the bizarre or disturbing things the Bible actually tells us about Christmas. But throughout the conversation, it kind of turned toward Joseph and what he was doing. And I kind of started asking questions about things. And we got to this point, I said, raise your hand if you're under this understanding. If you think Christians believe that when you're a Christian, all your problems go away. And guess how many hands went up? 100%. All the hands went up. There's this idea out there that Christians believe when we follow Jesus, we go to church, we're good people, all our problems are going to go away. At least we believe that. And I don't know where this impression comes from because it certainly isn't in the Bible. It's not anything I was ever taught in the church myself. It's not anything I myself have ever taught to anybody. But this idea is out there, that, hey, Christians believe when we follow Jesus, all our problems are going to go away. Now, those of us who have done this following Jesus bit for a while, and that's most of us here, we know that's not the truth. We know from reading the Bible it's not true. We know from personal experience it's not true. We know, Jesus himself said, John 16:33, in this world you will have troubles. So we know life can sometimes get a little uncomfortable. We know we're supposed to expect it, but let's be honest. Even though we know that in our minds, our rational minds, our thinking minds, most of the time we expect life to play out a little differently. It doesn't take very much of life going not the way we want it to, a little bit of difficulty for us to start saying, oh, God, what happened, right? Show us the picture, Jim. Oh, right? Something horrible happens. Like, oh my, has this ever happened to anyone? No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. But and we start thinking, God, where are you in all this? This isn't how it's supposed to be, God. And we start saying that, why me? And of course, I'm talking about things in life that are much more serious than an empty toilet paper roll. I mean, there are things in life that go seriously wrong. And some of you are living in that place right now. It's not in any way going in the direction we want it to. And even though we know, right, in our rational minds, we shouldn't expect things to be perfect, we kind of do. We get caught up in that, hey, what's wrong here, God? Come on, I've been good, God. I've been following you. I'm doing the best I can to live for you. So this must be wrong, God. Why is the difficulty? See, when reality hits, we discover we're just kind of like a lot of other people out there. We actually think life should be easier because we follow Christ. Imagine how Joseph felt. This is where this all comes from. Imagine how Joseph felt. I mean, because Joseph, he's like us in the biblical narrative. I mean, this is us in the story, right? Joseph, he's there, and he's trying to live for God as best he can. Chapter 1, verse 19, that I read you actually tells us he was faithful to the law. Joseph's very much intent on obeying God's law, living his life for God. It means he was a righteous man. He's righteous. And then suddenly, through no fault of his own, well, things get very uncomfortable. They get difficult. Troubles come his way. It's just kind of dropped in his life. And not only does difficulty come Joseph's way, but then an angel comes and says, hey, Joseph, you know that difficulty? God put it there. God put that difficulty in your life, Joseph. In Joseph, we see not only that difficulty comes our way, but we see that sometimes God puts it there for a purpose. And the question is, how do we handle that? What's our response? What's our answer? And when God says, hey, I got something difficult for you, I'm going to put it there, what are you going to do? What's our response when God calls us to difficult things? We look at Joseph today because he's got kind of the answers. He found his way through it. He sets a good pace for us. So let's look at Joseph's story, see how he handles it. Most of us are a little bit familiar with Joseph's story from the Gospel of Matthew. Now we see Joseph and Mary, they're engaged, right? They're pledged to be married. So it was kind of like engagement, a little bit more formal than our engagements nowadays. It would actually take a legal proceeding to separate this engagement. But they weren't fully married yet. They kept separate households, separate beds. But they were referred to as husband and wife. And so it is during this, before they're officially married, Mary is found to be pregnant. Right? Now Matthew, when he writes his gospel, he's going to this is God. This is God's Holy Spirit did this. This is something God did. But Joseph, how could he possibly believe that? Can you imagine Mary trying to explain this to Joseph? And he just says, well, okay. Going back to our youth the other night on Tuesday, I was talking to them about this, and I said again, show of hands, who of here, if someone came and told you this story that Mary says, believes that? And guess how many hands went up? 0% this time, because we don't believe this. Why should we expect Joseph to believe this stuff, right? All Joseph knows is, hey, he hasn't touched Mary. Kid's not mine. What's the logical conclusion if you're Joseph? Mary's been doing something she shouldn't have been doing with someone she shouldn't have been doing it with, right? That's the conclusion. She cheated on Joseph. She's been impure. And it's probably what Joseph thought. The Bible doesn't tell us outright that that's what he thought, but it kind of hints at it very, very strongly. So this is scandalous. Here's a scandal, and now it's being dragged into Joseph's life. He's done nothing. And the only question for Joseph is, how deeply do I want to get involved in this scandal? And depending on how he wants to answer that, he's got some options. Well, the kid's not his. But if he can get past his indignation, if he can get past the idea that Mary's been unfaithful, he can, marry her and, there you go. But what's the conclusion going to be of the people? It wasn't just Mary, it was Mary and Joseph doing what they weren't supposed to be doing. Because, sadly in our culture, this sort of stuff before marriage used to be taboo when we cared what God said about purity, but we don't care what God says about purity anymore, so we just do what we want. But in Mary and Joseph's society, it was still taboo because they still cared what God said about purity. So shame for Mary and shame for Joseph. Or there's another option. You can call Mary out in her sin. Mary, this is what you've been doing. You've been unfaithful. And Joseph can be there leading the charge, right? Separating himself from the scandal. Maybe being the first one to pick up the stone when they stoned Mary, because that's probably where this was going to head. And maybe Joseph could even get some sympathy points. Oh, the poor guy, look what that woman did to him. Or look how righteous he was and how he handled that. But it seems Joseph cares about Mary, so he doesn't go down that avenue. Third option. Divorce Mary quietly. Draw as little attention to the scandal as you can, but get out. Get out. Leave everything, just get out. And this is the option Mary has decided on. Or not Mary, Joseph has decided on when he goes to sleep that night. He goes to take a nap, and the nap changes his life. Because, that's when he's visited by an angel in his sleep. And let's be honest, we get used to, we're so used to reading that, it's like, okay, and then Joseph was visited. Joseph's visited by an angel. And this time, the angel comes and pretty much tells him some outrageous things. It's pretty much, Joseph, we know life's been difficult, but that's where God has put you. And he's put you there, Joseph, because he's got some more difficult things for you. He wants you to take care of. And then the angel kind of explains some things, some of the difficulties. He says, verse 20, what is conceived in Mary is from the Holy Spirit. See, she's telling the truth, Joseph. I know I can't believe it either, but it's true, right? So it's true. This is God's work. And then the angel goes on to say, she will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. You see, this is significant for Joseph, because the angel says, Joseph, you are going to name the child. In that culture, the father named the child. So if Joseph gives the child the name, Joseph's saying, this is me, he's mine. I'm taking responsibility for it. And so Joseph, the angel is saying, you're going to name the kid. And finally, he will save his people from their sins. Now, how is that a difficulty for Joseph? I don't know about you, but how would you like to have that burden? Oh yeah, you get to raise the guy who's going to save the whole world. Don't mess up or anything, right? No pressure there. So through the angel, God pretty much kind of declares to Joseph, you're called to a difficult task, Joseph. I'm going to put some difficulty in your life. The unspoken question to Joseph is, are you going to do it? You're going to follow God here. Are you going to accept the fact that the righteous life is not always easy? It's not always carefree. Are you going to follow God when he puts difficulty into your life? God asks, are you willing to live in and through difficulty in order to magnify and glorify me to the world? And Joseph, he's got to be thinking, do I dare take God up on this? Even it's difficult now, and I see it only getting more difficult. but it's where God's placed me. It's what he's given me. He's given me difficult. Do I take it? Do I follow him? You see, we know following God often puts us in difficult situations and changes our life from a worldly perspective for the worse, right? That's what it meant for Joseph. Following God here for Joseph is not a one and done deal. It's like, as long as I was just, okay, we'll go through the ceremony and we're done. Now, this is going to stick around, isn't it? And the implications for Joseph's life would continue way beyond those first few months. We see in scriptures that as Joseph continues to accept the difficult things God puts in his life, God just keeps giving him more difficult things. Isn't that great? It was probably a long time before things got any easier for Joseph. Maybe they never got easier. Right? Consider the difficulties God kept putting in Joseph's life. When Joseph said, God, yes, I'll follow you in this difficult thing, there's more. Eventually, Joseph, he's probably ending up, he's enduring the ridicule now too. Because all that ridicule centered on Mary transferred to Joseph, especially when he raised the baby as his own. If that baby really is his, then he's a sinner too, just like Mary. Or if the boy isn't his and he's just covering for Mary, well, how pathetic is he? I don't want to go buy anything he builds me in his carpenter shop. Some of you know from experience, ridicule, it just doesn't go away, does it? No matter where you go, it follows. So God called Joseph to ridicule. To answer God's call meant Joseph, he's going to face ongoing life-threatening danger. We read in Matthew 2 how after Jesus is born, the evil King Herod is intent on finding the baby and killing him because he's afraid he's going to grow up and steal his throne from him. So Herod starts a killing spree. Joseph is warned in a dream of this happening, so he takes the baby, he takes Mary, and they flee. There's this desperate flight to Egypt. To save the kid's life, to save Mary's life, to save his own life. All right, from there, obeying God meant self-imposed exile. They're stuck in Egypt now. They are foreigners living in a foreign land. Look, there's no family, probably no friends, and we got to stay here. Until years later, Herod finally dies. And perhaps the most difficult thing Joseph would have to endure was that he would work and he would sacrifice. And he would be so dedicated to God's plan. And most of it would be overlooked and forgotten. And some of us understand this, right? Because certainly in his own day, the people weren't going to be knocking down Joseph's door to say, oh, Joseph, you're doing so good. Thank you for doing all these wonderful things for God. Even today, when we as Christians celebrate Joseph in the Bible, the amount of stuff that we remember about Joseph is underwhelming. The Apostle Paul wrote a huge portion of our New Testament. 13 letters attributed to the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. Many of you have read them. Guess how many times Paul mentions Joseph? 0. The gospel writer Mark, he's the one who probably wrote the first gospel. Guess how many times Joseph is mentioned in the Gospel of Mark? 0. See, no one's caring. All these difficult things and situations God's bringing into Joseph's life, and no one's noticing. It's like no one cared how much Joseph was trying. It's like no one cared how much he was sacrificing to do the difficult things God kept putting in his life. And that's pretty much, how it is. The angel comes and visits Joseph. It pretty much says God's presenting you here with this difficult life. And the question is, okay, Joseph, you're going to follow God. He doesn't offer you a life that's perfect or easy. On the contrary, he's offering you something very difficult. Joseph, what are you going to do? Let me ask you what you would do. You're Joseph, what do you do? Because a lot of times, we are Joseph. God puts difficult things in our lives. He says, are you going to follow me on this? Right? Sometimes difficulty comes into our life, and it's because we live in this broken, sinful world. And so we get difficulty as a result of our own sin or our own sinful actions or attitudes, or because it's a backlash from other people's sin, their sinful actions, or their sinful attitudes. But sometimes we get difficult things in our lives because God puts them there. God puts them there as a way of drawing us into his story, as an opportunity. However difficult they present themselves, they're opportunities to magnify God in and with our lives. What do? What's your response when God gives you something difficult? Maybe it's serving that person you really don't want to. Oh, they annoy me. Or they're just going to take advantage of me. Maybe God calls you to fill that function or that position or that purpose or participate in that ministry through your local church. Oh, I really don't want to. It's going to take my time, and I'm going to have to go out and do things, and I just really don't like to do it. Maybe it's accepting something or someone or a situation in your life that you weren't planning on at all. You're like, God, not at my age, not at this point in my life, not after so many years, listen, not in my current home life, not with my current financial status, God, no. What's your response when God calls you to difficult? We know Joseph's response. Joseph shows us the right response. Joseph makes the righteous response. Jim, show us. Matthew 1, verse 24. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him. Joseph's life is amazing. And the angel was kind of laid it off him, and he just does it. When God calls Joseph to something difficult, something uncomfortable, something inconvenient, Joseph says yes. He does. It says everything. He did all that the angel commanded him. Probably suspecting, hey, things are going to get more difficult. No one's even going to care that I'm doing this. But Joseph says, I'm all in, God. No matter how difficult, I'm following you because it's not about me. It's for your glory, God. I'm all in. And I look at that. I look at Joseph and I say, oh, if I could have that faith, if I could have that trust in God the way Joseph does, to just say, yes, God, I'm all in. No matter how difficult, I just want to glorify you, God. But most of us aren't there. And oh, what opportunities do we miss to glorify God in this world? And what opportunities do we miss to bring a more complete joy to our own lives? Because that's what God gets to. When we follow him into the difficult things, he brings it around to multiply his joy in our lives. I want to read to you something Oswald Chambers wrote in his famous Utmost for His Highest. Oswald Chambers writes, if a man or woman is called of God, it doesn't matter how difficult the circumstances may be. God orchestrates every force at work for God's purpose in the end. If you will agree with God's purpose, he will bring not only your conscious level, but also all the deeper levels of your life, which you yourself cannot reach, into perfect harmony. He's saying, you follow God in difficult things, and God's going to work things for his glory. So all those parts of your life, even parts you don't even know about, they're all going to work together to come into God's perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I imagine that's what Joseph experienced as he kept following God into those difficult things. Perfect harmony. It's what awaits us if we would be so bold as to accept and take God up on the opportunities he presents to us, even when they're difficult. See, God's going to bring difficult things into your life. Will we take up the challenge that we will experience that perfect harmony that God draws us into through it? You know, I want to work toward a conclusion today by reading you a short testimony by Barbara Rainey. And some of you might recognize her name. She's the wife of Dennis Rainey, who is an author and a radio show host, New Life Live. Some of you might know it. But Barbara herself, she is a writer and a speaker in her own right. And this is what she writes. After an exhausting week wrangling 5 relentless children, I started feeling a little off. It's sleep. I need more sleep, I thought. A short rest during their downtime didn't help at all. It's food. I need a snack, I thought. An apple dipped in peanut butter might help, but it didn't. Something wasn't right. I didn't want to admit it, but my mind began to panic. I had Dennis pick up a pregnancy test on the way home from work. I cried for 3 days when I discovered the answer. It wasn't off I was feeling. I was pregnant. God, I don't want to do this again. See, God was asking me, telling me, making me be a mother for a 6th time. Really? I thought I had obeyed God enough with my womb. Pregnancy was difficult for me, and I wanted my body back. 5 was what we'd agreed to. Happily, we were done. All the baby gear sold at garage sale. I was free. But now God was asking me to die to self again. See, it seems Barbara Rainey, she's like Joseph, right? She's dealing with a difficult calling from God. Is she going to follow God into it joyfully or not? See, she didn't want to go God's way. She knows it's going to be difficult. She knows she would have to surrender her own plans, her own feelings even. But she followed. The question for you today is, will you do likewise? When God calls you to something difficult, are you going to do it? Are you going to go joyfully? Will you learn from Joseph? Will you learn from Barbara Rainey and lay down your thoughts, lay down your dreams, lay down your plans, lay down your feelings so that God's great purpose will be worked out in this world in and through your life? That's what God's calling you to. And answering that call, it's scary and it's difficult, but it's also joyfully rewarding. I mean, we don't focus on Joseph very often. We talked about that. But when we remember Joseph in the church, we remember him as that righteous, courageous, honorable man. That's joyful reward. You know, Barbara Rainey, how did her story end? Let me read you how she concludes her testimony. By the way, baby number 6, though a sinner like us, has been a delight since the day God gave her to us. His ways are the best. See, Barbara Rainey, she's experienced that joyful reward. She's saying God's ways are the best, and God's ways are the best, even when he leads us into difficult places. Will you follow him when he calls you that direction? Let's pray.